First of all, Zulu, how's it going? How are you tracking?
Oh yeah, pretty good, pretty good. We've got plenty of things to talk about today. Over just earlier today, I was trying to because there was this video released by I think his name was like Gingy something. He was like a football content creator, I guess. Um, where he was trying to get somebody kicked out of the stadium for being racist against the Ghana team, and people were from the UK who kept saying like, "Oh my God, this is terrible. Free speech doesn't include racism." They were saying, "I can't believe the Americans are calling this free speech. That's why the country's so terrible." And like I was just running it over my head earlier, and like asking people, trying to figure out what actually do the normies think that the term free speech literally refers to, if not the freedom to speak. It's quite baffling and very opaque. It seems to me like the basic line that they go down is that, well, they know that racism is bad. They've been told that many times. Okay, that's axiom one, racism bad. Axiom two, the government is there to stop bad things, so therefore the government's going to stop racism. That's just a direct implication of their axioms there. But they also know that, well, the government also is supposed to be enshrining, that's the right word, enshrining freedom of speech. But don't worry, because they've got a new axiom. They've been told by the news media that free speech doesn't include hate speech. So very simply, the government is able to infringe that speech, but it's not included in hate speech. And it occurs to me that there is no coherent understanding of the term free speech that we can get to here. So it's almost like a God of the gaps thing where we've cut away all these freedoms. And it's like, well, we don't have any positive case for free speech. But it's not these things. That's what we know. It's very sickening.
For sure. Maybe we'll start with the World Cup then, since you've jumped off with that example, and I totally agree with everything you've said so far. I would just say, like, as a general opening, the US hosting the World Cup has just been like an absolutely fantastic opportunity for leftists from other countries to like just cope and seethe non-stop for a wide range of reasons. Basically, a lot of leftists in other countries, um, a lot of their personality revolves around America bad. Like, that is a very, very core tenet of a lot of the ideologies of Europeans and of Australians. If you're like a leftist in Australia, like, America bad is very core to your philosophy. So, um, having the World Cup be hosted in America, and in Australia's case, having America in our pool in the World Cup has altogether created some fantastic opportunities for people to say some really, 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 really retarded things. Um, Start off with this. So, as I said, obviously the US and Australia played against one another in the World Cup, and in the lead up to that game, there was a fair bit of shit talk from a lot of like this one American pundit in particular. His name's like Mike Grella. He was never really that much of a like great footballer himself. I think he played a bit of championship in the UK, which, for those of you who don't know, is like the second tier of professional football or soccer in the UK or in England. So, he was a moderately good, footballer who was good enough to play professionally, but like not at the highest level. Um, but yeah, so he was talking a lot of shit about the Australians, said that the US would wipe the floor with them and whatever else. And basically, for a lot of Aussies, it was like the quintessential like arrogant American like stereotype or archetype, and it made them really, really upset. And like, there's an element of that that I can understand. Like, I don't mind people, getting into having banter or getting into it about sports. Like, that's kind of a big part of sports, is the banter and trash talk that goes with it. But um, then the US went out and actually backed up the shit talk that was coming from a lot of their pundits and beat us 2-0, and beat us pretty comfortably as well. Like, 2-0 didn't really reflect how much better they were than us on the pitch. But um, it then has led to some incredible, yeah, just coping and seething from Australian sports fans, and not even just sports fans, just Australians in general. Because, like I said, these people, like, a core part of their philosophy is America bad. So when America beats us at something like football, it's a huge problem, and I've just found it incredibly funny to watch. Um, I think one of my key takeaways is that a lot of Americans actually don't realize how many Aussies hate America. Like for a lot of Americans, Australia is like Crocodile Dundee and Bluey, where we're all very like laid back and chill, and we just kind of like g'day mate. We kind of just go with the flow. Like we're a very laid back kind of country in the minds of Americans, and that is kind of the image that Australians have tried to portray ourselves on the international stage with movies like Crocodile Dundee and other, various, forms of media that have managed to grow outside of like our little bubble down here. But the reality is that realistically couldn't be further from the truth as far as how most Australians actually behave. We would have to be one of the most neurotic, uh, you know, people that I know of culturally. Like people are very, 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 very anti individualism, anti freedom of speech, anti pretty much most of the core tenets of the philosophy that Zulu and I hold. So it's almost a minor miracle that I managed to become an ANCAP, or that any Australian becomes an ANCAP, because I think what it boils down to is that Aussies, like Australia, never had that kind of conceived in liberty, to borrow Murray Rothbard's terminology or the title of a Murray Rothbard book, like kind of, I suppose, origin story that America had. Obviously, America was founded during like the American Revolution, or the country, that is the nation, or the state. And so there was at least on some level like an appreciation for the value of individual sovereignty and whatnot, even though it was obviously imperfectly executed when it came to the Constitution, whether it was for slavery or just because of the fact that they justified the existence of a state. But at the very least, there is still that like belief in America somewhere that individualism and individual sovereignty is important. In Australia, we have none of that because Australians never really had to grapple for the right to individual sovereignty, even in the form of the right to self-govern with a state. Like that just never really happened. It was just like a slow kind of, I suppose, um, distancing from the British Empire, but like never actually overthrowing it, and to the point where like we're still technically subjects of the British Empire. Like we still require royal assent for any law that gets passed. It's obviously very ceremonial at this point, but I just kind of want to give people that kind of context for what Australia is actually like, for people who kind of have a very, very loose perception of it, because it's very, very different to what, like I said, what movies and TV and books might portray it as. I don't know if you had any kind of thoughts on that at all, Zulu.
Yeah, no, it's it. I think the Americans, they tend to it is a virtue of theirs that they're very optimistic as a people. At least for we're stereotyping as well, but for the most part, I think they're a more optimistic sort of people. And you say, like you're saying how it's like they were conceived in liberty. I mean, that's true. Like for whatever you want to say about the U.S. Constitution, certainly it didn't achieve its plan. Um, and there are definitely bad things about the Constitution, namely that it established a federal government. But it is fundamentally an attempt at a natural law document. They're trying to grasp at the natural law. I don't think they quite succeeded at it, but they were doing about as good as you could expect for that time. You see this explicitly in the Ninth Amendment. The Ninth Amendment says, in effect, this document, we accept natural law. We are enumerating certain rights that the people have, but that doesn't mean that we're disparaging or negating other rights that they already have. So it's saying, no, they already had these rights. We're just trying to write them down somewhere. But it does. They do sometimes, have a more rosy view of just how terrible a lot of these people are. And it's a similar situation in in the various satellite countries of the UK, where in Scotland it's pretty much the ideology of 90% of people that England is bad. You got to be against England no matter what. It's like, okay, not quite the case. It's a form of envy. It really is.
Yes, and I wanted to touch on something because obviously you brought up the Constitution, and how in America, at least, there's explicit enumeration of certain rights, and as you said, obviously it doesn't claim to be exhaustive of every right, but at the very least there are explicit rights granted by the American Constitution or by the U.S. Constitution. Um, That is not the case in Australia. The Australian Constitution is a long document that barely enumerates any rights whatsoever. A lot of stuff like freedom of speech, um, and freedom of communication and freedom of religion and whatever else the case may be, have to kind of be implied by kind of certain clauses where the High Court being our equivalent of the U.S. Supreme Court that kind of rules on the Constitution. Um, Basically has to imply, oh well, they said this, and we can imply because of that this is true. So to give you like an example, so here is the full exhaustive list of rights that you have as an Australian citizen according to the Constitution. So the first is the right to a trial by jury. So if you're charged with a crime, you're guaranteed to have the right to have a jury of your peers decide your fate in a trial if you wish. That is one of your rights. Um, Freedom of interstate trade and commerce, and basically preventing states from restricting trade across borders. Now, that has been under attack. Well, it came under attack during COVID, and it was just absolutely hilarious because the High Court did rule that it was justified for the different states in Australia to impose like borders to prevent people from crossing from one state to another to protect people from the coronavirus, which was just incredible because it's literally one of the five rights that we're supposed to have had enumerated, and the High Court approved just flagrant violations of it. So it kind of shows you how much value and stock Australians actually put into the explicit rights that we are supposed to have, as minimal as they are. Um, Freedom of religion. So I'll retract what I said earlier. You do actually have the right to select your religion in Australia. You're not allowed. The federal government can't make laws establishing one or imposing religious observance or prohibiting the free exercise of any religion. Um, Freedom from interstate discrimination. So you can't be discriminated against if you live in Victoria or if you've travelled from Victoria to Queensland. The Queensland government can't discriminate against you in any way. And then the last one, this is the funniest one, in my opinion. It enumerates the just terms for acquisition of property. So it basically says that the government must pay fair compensation if it acquires your property. So that is an explicit right in Australia. Not that you have the right to own property, but that you have rights if the government decides to take property from you. Like, so that's like kind of where we're at as a country. It's like the government is explicitly entitled to take your property. The only qualification is that you have the right to seek just compensation or fair compensation. There's a famous movie, or one of the more popular movies in Australia is called The Castle, and it kind of talks a little bit about this. It's actually one of the only pieces of media from Australia that I can think of that has a relatively libertarian message. Basically, this family, what the government wants to take away their house to build like an expansion to an airport nearby, and they kind of fight against it and take their battle all the way to the High Court, where they eventually win and retain the right to keep their home. Now, the thing is that a lot of Australians take that as like an anti kind of big corporation message because it's the government is doing it at the behest of some company, like large, international, airliner. So that's where a lot of Australians will take it. But I think if you actually were to do some proper media literacy, you'd see that it's actually a criticism of the government and specifically that the violation of that explicit right that's granted in the Constitution. So, anyway, Zuli, did you have any super chats or anything you need to read out, or anything else you wanted to add at all?
Yes, we do. We do have from D Egidius for $5 US. Thank you very much. Who says, as has been said, Americans are benevolently ignorant of Europe. Europeans are malevolently well informed about the US. And this does happen. I mean, it's the price of being the world superpower. You're gonna be the focus of the envy, I suppose.
Yes, and just quickly before we get to Casimir and Sue, guys, I can see your hands. I promise I'll get to you very, very shortly. Just on that, yeah, I think it comes down to, on some level, it is that knowledge gap that you've just kind of referenced, the person in the super chat and you, Zulu, that basically Americans don't give a shit about Australian politics. Okay, I guarantee you this. The only former prime minister, I should say, of Australia that anyone that I could bet that any Americans would be able to name is Harold Holt, because he's the one that died by drowning, and then we named a swimming pool after him. So he's kind of famous for the wrong reasons.
I would think
But
Albo.
Oh well, the current one, yeah, of course. I think I'm thinking like obviously
Yeah.
historically, like I can name every U.S. president dating back to 2000, and the years that they were in office for. Guarantee you, there's very very few Americans, if any, that could do the same for Australia. I would be almost certain that they wouldn't know who like John Howard is, for instance, who's probably the most famous and longest serving prime minister of recent times. I wouldn't be able to tell you who that is. I can tell you who fucking FDR is and Calvin Coolidge. Like I couldn't even. I probably know more US presidents than I know fucking Australian prime ministers. To be quite honest with you, so
Yeah, and
that's
like,
where it's like that. Sorry, go ahead.
and honestly, I think this is the it's an implicit recognition of the fact that America truly is the last battleground for capitalism in this big fight of capitalism versus communism. America is the final battleground, so of course that's where everybody's going to be putting their focus. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. And so to that point, there is this kind of you do have if you're an Australian, you do have this time to develop this resentment towards America because so much of our society, whether it's media, sport, politics, so much of it is influenced by America that America is going to be on your mind a lot more than vice versa. So that you have this time to build up like feeling towards them, whether it's positive or negative. And obviously, unfortunately, a lot of people choose the negative. And whereas for America, like any other given nation, they're just so low on their list of priorities that you're not going to develop anything beyond kind of polite ambivalence towards other countries unless you excuse me, unless you like maybe travel there or something, and then you might, I don't know, kind of like it because you've been there as a tourist, I suppose. But anyway, I do want to get to the hands, so we'll start with Sue, and then we'll go to Casimir. But Sue, good morning. Well, it's good morning for me. How's it going?
Good
What's
evening.
happening? Yeah,
I
good
want to
evening.
go back to the topic of World Cup. So a lot of people here don't know, but US, Australia, Turkey, and Paraguay were in Group D. And I guess congrats for Australia's like destruction against Turkey. And then it was like an insane, like complete destruction. But what surprised me and made me notice, I always thought like, oh, Australia's probably like likes the US, right? Like they're similar countries in that sense. It's like both Anglo background, Anglo culture, and they're both, like widespread countries. Like I thought like it would be like they would love Americans. So both America and Australia passed to the 32 round. Like they both passed the stage. And so yesterday US was playing against Turkey, but it didn't matter in terms of score. It was just a friendly match. It was like useless match. And then Turkey won yesterday's game. And then I saw videos of Australians celebrating in masses like US has lost against Turkey, and I'm like, this has no impact on Australia whatsoever. This game is like completely irrelevant to Australians. So it's like I would expect them to support US because like they're way more similar than Australia is similar to fucking Turkey. And then like there are like bunch of people celebrating just because America lost against Turkey. I'm like, what the hell? Like these people must have like some serious grudge against the
It's
US team in USA.
it's very funny because obviously for a lot of present day Australians, a lot of the justification for their dislike of America is like, Donald Trump and, they're a fascist conservative state or, whatever else. And I just find that funny because, like, you know, Turkey versus America, which country has more, discrimination? I wonder, like, so if that's your justification, then I don't think you should fall on the side of, I don't think you should fall on the side of America, of Turkey in that case.
Turkey's
So,
the bastion of equality and freedom.
yeah,
What are you talking
exactly.
about?
Yeah, they're very, very anti-discrimination over there. So I did find that quite funny. Did you want to add anything else, Sue, at all?
No, that's all. I hope the US wins the World Cup. So it will be a huge fuck you and a middle finger to the rest of the world and cocky Europeans who think they're the best at soccer. So that's all.
Yeah, well, I mean, if that happens, then they're going to have to change the name of the sport officially to soccer. Like, I
Fuck
think
yes.
that's going to be what has to happen there. But no,
By
thanks
the
for
way,
that,
is it
Sue.
is it true that
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Australians call it soccer? Because I heard that somewhere.
Yeah, so we would. Well, I mean, our national team is called the Socceroos. So yes, we do. I mean, obviously, because the thing is, little quick Australian culture lesson for you all. There are four different codes of what would fall under the umbrella of football that are played in Australia. So you have obviously, as we've kind of talked about, soccer or association football, the one where you can't use your hands except if you're the goalkeeper. And then you have Australian rules football. So that's like a unique code to Australia. It's typically played in Victoria, and then a lot of like the western states like South Australia, like basically the western half of, or the western 3/4 of Australia plays Australian rules football. And then you have rugby league. So rugby league is very popular in New South Wales and Queensland, especially Brisbane and Sydney, or actually especially outside of the metro areas. It's